Thank you very much for agreeing to this interview. We had wanted to interview you on the 40th anniversary of your film, A Circle of Deceit, Die Fälschung in German, if you'll forgive my pronunciation.
Perfect.
Which you shot in 1981 at the height of the civil war in the country. The film starred two very prominent actors, Hanna Schigulo and Bruno Ganz, and is based on a novel by Nicholas Bourne, and tells the story of a journalist who comes to Beirut, comes to Lebanon, to cover the first round of the country's civil war in 1976. The journalist, Jörg Laschen, who is played by Ganz, becomes disillusioned with his profession and its focus on violence, and one can almost say the pornography of violence, to satisfy Western audiences. This focus, he feels, has turned him into someone deceiving the public, hence the title of the film. This provokes in him a reassessment of his professional life as well as his personal life. May I ask first why you decided to make this film? What was it about the story that interested you?
I think it was the city of Beirut and the Middle East as such that I was immediately drawn when I read the novel by the opportunity to make a movie in such a place. I mean, I had been visiting Beirut in peacetime in the early 60s, so that was not really what attracted me. But in the same early 60s, I had followed my master, Louis Malle, whose assistant I then was, for a reportage for French television to Algeria, and during the Algerian War and the war for independence. And everything in reading the novel reminded me of Algiers, you know, the light, the Mediterranean, and then the unexpected violence and destruction of a place that is supposed to be paradise. So what is getting into us human beings to do that? Basically, that was the question.
Well, what's very interesting is the fact that you did this after you had made The Tin Drum, which won an Oscar for Best Foreign Picture, as well as the Palme d'Or at Cannes. Normally, after such successes, a filmmaker would go in the opposite direction of seeking commercially successful projects, rather than a high-risk venture like Circle of Deceit. What should this tell us about you?
I was ill-advised. I should have listened to you. but I remember I made this decision literally at the morning after the Oscars at the swimming pool of the Hilton Hotel in Beverly Hills. And because like I had an offer to work for Steven Spielberg, who was doing a television series, Twilight Zone. And people said, no, you shouldn't do that. That's television. You should wait for a better offer. And I thought, but with the let's say the fame or the renown or the fact that I'm bankable now, I have to take advantage to make a movie that I could not do otherwise. A year ago, I could not have done Circle of Deceit. You know, nobody would have given me money. And so my thinking went the other way around. And professionally, it may have been a mistake. But as for my life, it was one of the strongest experiences I ever had in making a film. Spent almost 6 months in Beirut, and you know, it's different. It was, you were partaking in a war, even though not as a fighter, but you were experiencing the misery of the population and the madness of it all. I mean, that's what life is all about. And I think it has more value than another Hollywood picture.
Well, as someone who is here at the time, I can say that, you know, when you're stuck in a war, you become rather lonely. And so when I had first read that that there was a foreign film crew that came to Lebanon, it was, on a personal level, it was nice to see that someone was actually coming to discover the reality of the country. But may I ask one question tied into this? I mean, it must have been very difficult, nonetheless, despite at the time your success, to persuade actors like Gans and Shigula to come to a country that was risky. I mean, how difficult was it for you to put this together, both financially and in terms of your actors?
Well, to eliminate the finances, I just used the money we had made on the tin drum, and actually lost it all because The Circle of the Sea was not a success. But it's a very valuable film in my biography. The fact is, there were lots of reportages about the war in Lebanon, you know, whether in German or French television or in magazines, showing always the same pictures of violence. The pictures you can also discover in the movie, but the ones where our journalist is revolted against. Other than that, the decision came stepwise. I first came in probably September or so, August, September of 1980. And it was what they call a period of relative calm. Une période de calme relatif. And indeed, you know, even if at night you heard some occasional gunfire, life seemed to be going on, and it actually, there was a feeling in town that the war might be over. I mean, this is 1980, so it's not 76, 77, that period. And everybody in Beirut encouraged me to come. You know, whether it was the crew I hired, the production manager, George Nasser, or Jocelyn Saab, or all the people who from Beirut who later worked on the film, they were all eager and say, of course it's possible, you know, we'll just go around the hot spots and find zones. And so that's what I told the actors in Berlin, and I told my producer foremost, and because we could not get insurance. Normally, when you make a movie, you get an insurance, but in a war zone, you don't get insurance. And we had to bring our trucks with equipment and lighting and generators, and so by ship from Genova in Italy, first across the Alps from Munich to Genova, and then from Genoa to Jounieh. But the most difficult part was to get from Jounieh to West Beirut, because we were stationed in Hamra, and as you know, the city was divided, and and our trucks, that was the first bad experience. They got under fire as they, you know, tried to cross the Green Line and get from Jounieh to the city. Later, we found arrangements. That was our candid approach. It's I think in wartime, as in all other times, you have to look for direct communication, personal communication, talk to the people. And so on the west side, we were covered because I had an introduction to Abu Ammar, Arafat. I first met Abu Iyad, and I went through the whole range of the Palestinians who were mistrusting, because I came from West Germany and they had better relations with East Germany. But somehow, personality always wins the day. You talk and you explain why you're coming, and that you're not really here to take sides, but that it's inevitable while you show things that the audience may take sides. And we had the same conversations with in Ashrafieh with actually it was my assistant director, the later famous director Régis Varnier, who was French, and so he took care of this. So he went to the headquarters of the Kataib, met the Jemails and explained, we're going to make a movie there, so don't worry, it's just a movie. We're not taking part in the war. And my production manager, a German, he struck a good relation with the Syrian general who was in charge of the because Beirut was under Syrian occupation. And he managed, because like all militaries are interested by movies. They always want to be in the movies, even the general. So when we explained to him, you have this whole no man's land around the Place des Martyrs, Place des Canons. Nobody is allowed to enter there, either from the east nor from the west. So this for us is an ideal location to make a movie. We're not going to disturb anybody, and we not have to worry about pedestrians and people and cars who are there. And somehow he agreed. And we did, as a test shot, this probably best shot in the whole movie, when Bruno Ganz is running down the avenue. I don't remember, it was Avenue Allenby or something, all in ruin, this long perspective, which reminded me of Berlin and German towns after the war, which was another strong motivation for me. And Bruno had to run down that street in kind of a surrealistic scene. And we were just in the trunk of a car with the camera, preceding him. And so this was 2 months before we actually did the shooting. And we set a few explosions in the background to make it look more real. And we shot the scene, but Bruno was very scared. Like he was not the kind of macho hero who wants to prove that he can do his own stunts or so. And he was right to be worried, because if you watch the shot, you will see that wherever there is an intersection, there are walls of earth built up because of the snipers. So I had to explain him, whenever you come to an intersection, duck down a bit, don't hold your head high, because they're the snipers. And sure enough, we got fire. And but everything was okay. A few bullet holes in the car or something when we got to the parking lot. So Bruno got hooked, even though he's really not at all a fearless character. But after this first test shooting we'd done, he agreed to come back 2 months later in January to actually do the film. And actually he talked Anna Shigula into coming along, and now she was more fearless anyhow. But there was something, whoever got in touch with the city and with the situation of the city, and with the reality of a war zone, felt that you cannot look the other direction and walk away and say, well, too bad for them, but it's not my case. It's not. everybody somehow felt concerned. And even after 3 months of then shooting from January till March or April, I don't remember, the crew left the city with regret somehow. They caught the virus somehow of the on the one hand the Mediterranean light, the sweetness of the aromas of the le thym and za'atar, the little bread with za'atar, but then za'atar was also the association of the massacre in Za'atar. So exactly the combination in the word of al-Za'atar is it has both these meanings of sweetness and of to enjoy life and the beauty of life, and at the same time the horror of death. And so everybody felt somehow touched by this, and had also we had all had made friends, and to leave them behind it was not easy. And sure enough, a few months after our departure, which was a period of relative quiet, the fights started again.
Yeah, and in fact, one of the extras in your film was someone who would later be killed, a British hostage by the name of Philip Padfield.
Yes, yes. Yeah, most of the journalists in the movie were real journalists. They were there, they were staying at the Hotel Commodore. I went to see them, and of course they were all willing to partake, you know.
But actually
play their own parts, and somehow they because they had more experience than I had, and so it was helpful for the authenticity.
And of course, filming in Beirut, it goes to the real heart of the theme of the film, which is the fact that, you know, you were looking to depict reality and not a false rendition of reality, which I think is one of the main themes of this film.
Well, that was you see what is reality and how do you show reality? This is you could make a whole lecture about that, especially in film, and especially what film became ever since, because now CGI is the reality. And no, we didn't have any CGI digital effects in this movie. Fortunately, they didn't exist then. But the question was, do you, in order to be authentic, do you adapt the battles of Algiers, handheld camera, and throw yourself into it and pretend it's almost a documentary, and you happened to be there with the camera while it happened? Or the opposite, what I call the opera style, meaning you stage it properly, you set up your camera properly, you make camera movements, you even make crane movements, you show in your style that this is fiction. But then the reality in the fiction sometimes looks more real than in documentary style, because you're more affected by the emotions. It's funny enough, it is easier to enter into a fiction and to identify with fictitious characters than to enter into a documentary and identify or share emotions with documentary characters. You can't do that. You see unbelievable things in a documentary, but you always see them from the outside. At best you're a witness, and you somehow you say, well, I can't imagine what these people must be feeling. because they are in a document. These are people you don't really know. In a fiction, it's the opposite. You know the characters. You know, you left Hamburg with them at home. You saw his family. By the time he arrives in Beirut, you already identify with him. Same for the women. And soon for the people, the other people now he is meeting, you know, the doctor, by the way, Dr. Wali, who was a real doctor in Chatila, I think. And she's still there today, which is incredible. But these are fiction characters, and whatever happens to them, you receive it emotionally. And that's why I decided to adopt this non-documentary style, knowing that there would be so much authentic things happening in front of the camera, being staged, that you would, yeah. It was another way of showing reality. If you go back, say, to the Spanish War, it often made me think how things changed in the Spanish Civil War. You know, Hemingway and Malraux and everybody went there, and they took clearly sides, and they fought with the revolutionaries, some even with the fascists, and they made films. Malraux made the film L'Espoir, which are very strong. But then Hollywood made For Whom the Bell Tolls, and somehow it affected me more. It was a movie I saw as an adolescent, and I loved that movie. So in my case, you have two influences. You have the influences from all the movies I have seen about brave journalists and people fighting in wars, but always in the fiction side. And on the other hand, I had my own war experience because I was born before the Second World War, and I lived in a German city that was bombarded almost every night. So I was aware. I knew what it looks like and what it feels like to be in the shelter, and especially as a child, when things are even more horrible in a sense. And also I knew what these streets look like after the bombardment, and how children would play in these ruins, you know, with wooden guns. And so you would say, no, they will shun from any violence. They will shun from any warlike action. Quite the opposite. And we did the same, you know. I as a 6, 7, 8-year-old, we handled real guns, machine guns, stuff we found in the woods that the German soldiers had left behind. So it was one of the first days in filming that we ran upon this group of children playing war in the ruins and lighting tires and so on. It was for me, it was the very strong link between the place where I was. So I never wondered, who am I, a German, to make a movie in the middle of a Lebanese war? I felt entitled because of my own experience, or also of things I had seen in Algeria. And I suppose, well, human beings basically are the same all over. And I never pretended, that's another thing why it is clearly for me a fiction. I never pretended to be historical, very correct. I couldn't, some incidents were really extremely correct, but other things are full of contradictions. Like we wanted to film at Frangier's place in Aden, but we couldn't go to that side because once you had been established on one side, say on the Syrian-Palestinian side, you could not move over to the Christian side. So we picked...
And sorry to interrupt you, but you did shoot, I think, the hotel entrance. It looks like the casino of the
That
Lebanese.
is Junior. That is, you're absolutely right. But just to finish this, so that is why we picked, and we wanted a grandiose setting, you know, the let's say the old Lebanon, the beauty, look at the landscape. So we went to Beit Edin, which is in Druze territory. Of course, I knew this is not France's territory. But the dialogue, the interview was word by word an interview with Franci. So I suppose there will be very few spectators in Lebanon, but to get the message across in the rest of the world, I needed this kind of a beautiful place that shows the ancient history, the Phoenician and whatnot of Lebanon. So I never. I mean, when I was making mistakes, I was aware of it. I mean, I was falsifying myself. I was deceiving myself, but in the name of fiction. And you're right. By miracle, at some point, we could go back to Junior, and not only once, but for a whole week, we were shooting at the casino in Junior. Not even the outside, also the inside. You know, it's these contradictions. There may have been just a moment of relax. Okay, they want to shoot there, let them go. You know. And the week before, they were shooting at us when we were at Pasticano. It was crazy. I don't think I would do it again, but it felt normal under the circumstances. Since the population was experiencing this every day, why shouldn't we experience it too? You know. No exception for us.
But tell me, I mean, because of the visual, it's very striking visually. Did you prepare in a way for the visuals of the film? I mean, did you see other films by Lebanese directors or even by foreign directors who had shot in Lebanon? I mean, for example, if I could just describe
at the time I had seen one or two, but I don't even think, not even color films. No, I must say this is the genius of my cinematographer, Igor Luther, who also had done The Tin Drum, and with whom I had done also Coup de Grace in black and white. And he was the most extraordinary director of photography I ever worked with. And when I told him our style is not documentary, our style is opera, meaning when I say opera, I mean like Visconti or so. We will want to show the contradiction between the beauty of the world and the indifference of nature or of a city, as compared to the craziness of human beings. So it's I think we, you know, it was a gift from the city too. I mean, we didn't invent this. You know, when you had the Holiday Inn Hotel, which is actually still standing there, we could continue shooting there. But you know, you got this enormous block of cement sitting there with smoke coming out of the windows. You know, it's the picture speaks for itself. I don't know what the picture says, but you clearly feel something is not right here. It's how can you achieve with human engineering to put up such a building, you know, and everything so pristine, and then destroy it? What is the logic?
I mean, the Phoenicia Hotel sort of visually is at sort of visually, it seems at the center of the film. It's ironic that the hotel, which was in all the 1960s B films on Lebanon, you know, the spy films, the Phoenicia was almost the embodiment of Lebanese glamour. In your film, it's really the embodiment of Lebanon's ruin. And
right.
I found it ironic that it played that role in the film almost. But in your autobiography, you mention how Bruno Ganz, at one point during the shoot, described how basically blamed you for, as you put it, doing everything and nothing. That's how you. And
that is twofold. Yeah, he felt. No, I mean, you know, he comes from the theater. He's a wonderful screen actor, but an even more wonderful stage actor. And so he was used that he should be the absolute center of attention for the director. And which, say, when I do the tin drum, I was completely focused on the little boy. When I did other films, I was focused on the actors, on the main characters. But under the circumstances there was so much going on around him that I had a hard time to focus on him. You know, I was just as interested in what would happen to the little girl standing in the background than to my main character in the foreground. And he resented that, and I think he was right. He drew me back that as a director, my first responsibility is to the actors. But the second thing is, of course, I got distracted by the war. And from a certain point on, I didn't care too much about the actor's expression. I cared more about what is going on around him. And that is where, that was not planned, but that was the dynamic of our narration. That the more and more the city, the war, and the population there were taking over, and the problems of the main character somehow seemed futile, seemed, well, yeah, okay, but once they are back in Hamburg, I felt, and they debate about the quality and how should one report about it, and the whole dilemma of the journalist felt far less important than the situation of the world. And how come, you know, after thousands of years, we still fight wars, and we even fight what's worse, civil wars, because nothing worse than a civil war. And just dress neighbors against each other and killing, and that escalation. And so somehow it's, but this Bruno Ganz was very much aware of. And he actually pointed me, you know, instead of always showing the whole street and with hundreds of people running around and with their bazookas and playing their war game, which actually it was for most of them. Until they die, it was a big war game. You should more focus on the small things, he said, you know. But then again, the dynamic, I was caught on it. I agree, there is too much pyromania, too much fires, too many fires and explosions, too many photogenic explosions. half of them would have been enough. But that's the, the special effect man's always, they say, if we put another gallon of gas on it, the flames will be even bigger. Well, the funny thing is that in reality, if you look at documentaries, the explosions are not as spectacular as in the movies, but they are more deadly.
If I could ask you on the theme of the film, because I mean, I found something a bit interesting, if I may confess, a little bit confusing in the film. I mean, there's a very key scene in the movie. It's really the climatic moment of the movie where Laschen, the Bruno Ganz characters, kills someone. And in that scene, in a way, you almost seem to be saying that he has become one with the violence of the country. But at the same time, the film is about how the detachment, how journalists would come to Beirut and in a way be detached from its reality. And this detachment is what allowed them to depict the country almost like, as you said, only the violence in the country, without really looking more deeply in the society. So on the one hand, there is this implicit criticism of the journalist's detachment. And then there is a scene where, on the contrary, he's almost become integrated into Lebanon's violence. And we as a viewer wonder, how should we react to this very striking scene towards the end of the film?
To start with, I still wonder today how I should react to it. And I'll come back to it. You're right, the journalist has his point of view, but Hannah Shigula is correcting him. She has a completely different take on the country. And she had not only her character in the movie and in the novel, but also in real life. She had a completely different relationship with the country and with the people, much more positive than Bruno, who at moments said, but they are all crazy. It's now the moment where it is like a nightmare somehow. How come all of us? I mean, first of all, how come he brings a knife from Germany, meaning when he straps this on his leg, and it's a pretty mortal instrument, already you feel that he is prepared for violence. He pretends to be a pacifist, but the proof that he has this, it's not just for self-defense. It is also somehow to partake, So Bruno Ganz, not as a journalist, but as a jealous lover, all of a sudden runs into the city. There is this shooting everywhere. For once, he finds himself in the middle of it. He takes refuge in a shelter because everybody is running in that shelter. Then within the shelter, bombs explode, the walls cave in. A body falls upon him. He doesn't really know, is the guy strangling me? Is he an aggressor or what? So he grabs this knife, which he brought from Germany, meaning he brought the violence with him. He didn't find the violence in Beirut. He brought it with him, and he stabs this guy, and he is out of his mind at this moment. But there is something authentic in his gesture, which is, I'm no better than you. All the time I had this pacifist European view on it, but the moment I'm caught in a situation, I'm just as violent as everybody else, and I have the same mean human instinct, and in a sense, it's even a liberation to admit that. Mm-hmm. I mean, then he runs away from his deed. That's the famous shot when he runs through the city, which is a nightmare, which is not reality. And it's, as I said, and as you mentioned, it's confusing, it's confused, but to this point, this is a moment in the film where I was confused when making it, and I'm still confused when I'm seeing it. There is something there hard to explain, but I think the images have their own truth.
Yeah, it works. It doesn't in any way spoil the narrative, but it works. Yeah. Well, what was the response to your film when it came out? You said that it didn't have the commercial success that other films did. What was the response, and what did that provoke in you?
Yeah. But I can only say other people's response because I don't understand it to this day. You know, actually, the film aged very well. Today, it is considered something quite unique. But in Germany, everybody expected that I would explain them what the war in Lebanon is about and which side I would take. And the film, as the journalist said, but if you see this reality, it is very difficult to take sides. You can still say, yes, it's because the Palestinians were refugees for 40 years and they were locked in there, and so on and so on and so on. So you have a certain leftist leaning to them, but once the thing starts, it is very hard to take sides. And I wanted to show that I cannot explain it. You know, just look at it, but I cannot really explain it. The critics were mostly in those days. Left-leaning, and they felt that I had not taken clearly enough sides for the victims, because in their eyes, the Palestinians were the victims. In the eyes of most Lebanese, they were the cause. So in Paris, when the film showed, it was the opposite. People thought, or especially, it got very good reviews from the critics, but the Lebanese community in Paris thought this was an anti-Maronite, anti-Christian film, and that this was Syrian or Palestinian propaganda or whatnot. So at the end, nobody was happy, and then it you know, then the audience hears, oh, the film is controversial, and then they already who wants to get into controversy. Especially all of a sudden they said, oh, it's about the war in Lebanon. I don't want to know about that. Mm-hmm. I'm not interested in that. Let them kill each other. It's not my cause. So many things came together, and quite frankly, as a filmmaker, I know it always has to do with your characters. And I think the relationship between Bruno and Hannah Shigula was difficult to share for an audience. I mean, I totally stand with it. I could defend it, but it didn't come across. There is some magic missing there.
Would you consider this sort of the end of a period in your filmmaking, in the sense that obviously you're associated with the new German cinema, and then after this film came out in 1981, then soon thereafter you moved to Hollywood and began a different period in your career. Do you consider this, where would you situate this film in your broader work?
But in retrospect, you are right. But of course, at the time, I did not have the feeling that this was a turning point of any kind. You know, it was just after the success of the Tin Drum, I didn't want to be nailed to that image, you know, the Oscar-making filmmaker, literature, Second World War, blah, blah, blah. No, I wanted to be here and now, and the reality include the third world. Now, I know the Middle East is not the third world, but anyhow, open up to the world, talk about the conflicts in the world. But that was this movie, and I never, you know, I don't think I have a very linear evolution either in my life nor in my work, because right after that I did Proust, and Amour de Swann, which is, you know, quite the opposite of the civil war in Lebanon, uh, but it is still, you know, it is still telling human stories, and so is it a turning point? And I leave others to analyze the turning points in my.
Have you been back to Lebanon more than once or once? You've
No,
been.
only once. You know, at the time, I really got very serious threats. After the film was shown in Paris, we had to put a disclaimer in front of it that all this was fiction, but I got very serious messages also through my friends in Beirut, that I should better not come back for the time being. So the time being is a few years, Well, unbelievably, it dragged on for more than a few years. It dragged on for another 10 years. And then so time had passed. I had an invitation I accepted maybe 5-6 years ago. We had to cancel it at the last minute because it was insecure, generally, not for me, but for everybody, with the Hezbollah and so on. So I was only back once, last 2 years ago. And I was very happy to be back. I found that, of course, a lot of people had passed away or died violently, but still others were there. The city was there. It was a very strong experience. And that is where I really felt proud that I had made the movie, because when we were showing it, and I think it was one of the first public screenings in a regular cinema, and that there was a whole generation, younger generation, who had never seen the city, what their city looked like. And today, this film, which for me was a work of fiction, is the best document on 35 millimeter color film about the state of the city of Beirut at the time.
Absolutely, that's quite true. A final question. I mean, what are you doing today?
For 2 years, I'm working on a real documentary about agriculture and trees in the dry lands of the Sahel zone, going from Senegal to Djibouti. I've been shooting in Niger and Mali, and just came back from Senegal, about to go to Ethiopia. All this despite COVID, with some tricks, but to show that there are still hundreds of millions of people living as small farmers in these very dry lands, and the lands get drier and drier, the drought get worse, and they simply cannot live off the product of their field anymore. And it could be different, with a different way of doing agriculture, with trees bringing shade, but not planting trees, but growing trees from the roots, from the stumps, as you see. So it's quite a big undertaking. I'm very happy. I'm not sure I'll come back to fiction. I did until 2 years ago, my last fiction here in Germany film, but I think I'll do maybe more I don't know, no predictions, but I keep working anyhow.
Well,
And
that
I'd love to come back to Lebanon even for my documentary, because in the Bekaa Valley there is a similar initiative to bring back also les cèdres du Liban, which have been cut, and so I was up there with an organization, World Vision, and another one, Hope, Action for Hope, and I may come back to document their work.
Thank you so much for your time, Volker.
Thank you. No, I'm happy there is still an interest for this movie, but also for Lebanon, which I've been following these days. It's mind-boggling. Yeah.
Well, we hope for better days. Thank you so much.
Inshallah.